The obsidian floor of the grand conclave of Xylos refracted the cold, cerulean light filtering down from the crystalline apex of the dome, creating an illusion of infinite, submerged space. Around the vast, elliptical table, where gravity wells stabilized the holographic projections, the assembled Primarchs of the Ascendancy shifted their weight, the subtle movements of their multi-jointed limbs sending minute vibrations through the polished stone. The air, thick with the ozone scent of advanced sensor arrays, and the faint, mineral tang of Xylan physiology felt electrically charged, pregnant with unspoken accusation and profound, systemic fear. For 3 cycles, the matter of the Terran delegation had dominated every formal session, every clandestine subnet discussion, and every fevered deliberation within the high echelons of the Ascendancy. They had not merely disappeared the ambassador. They had erased the diplomatic envoy assigned to Sector Gamma-7 with a brutal efficiency that defied all known principles of interstellar conflict management. The projection before them displayed the last known telemetry, a scatter field of meaningless, inert isotopes where the diplomatic cruiser Perseverance had once existed, orbiting the 3rd pale blue orb of the Sol system. Kalen of the 4th Stratum, whose mantle bore the intricate silver filigree denoting stewardship over 300 colonized worlds, leaned forward, his primary ocular cluster narrowing into slits of violet light. His voice, usually a resonant baritone that commanded immediate attention across the subspace frequencies, was tight, compressed by controlled fury. "We have reviewed the final report from Observer Unit 99. The data remains immutable." The Terran response to the notification of quarantine was not a counteroffer, not a declaration of war, but silence, followed by the immediate cessation of all molecular signatures emanating from the designated embassy vessel. How does the Strategos Council rationalize this calculated void? This is not the behavior of a species capable of achieving FTL without external tutelage. Across the table, the slender, almost skeletal form of Lyra of the 10th Calculus, the Ascendancy's leading expert in xenopolitical modeling, projected her analysis onto the holographic display. Her tone was devoid of Kalen's emotional resonance, adhering strictly to probabilistic outcomes. "Rationalization is perhaps the incorrect epistemological framework, Primarch Kalen. Their actions defy the established algorithms of conflict initiation. Standard protocol dictates a graduated escalation upon perceived trespass or violation of territorial claims. The Terrans violated the Gamma-7 quarantine boundary, a clear transgression against Ascendancy stability mandates, and when presented with the ultimatum, they performed a controlled self-immolation of their diplomatic asset. Statistically, this equates to a declaration of absolute, total war executed with the lowest possible expenditure of initial resources. They chose annihilation over negotiation. A long, suffocating silence descended upon the chamber, broken only by the faint hum of the gravity stabilizers. The delegates from the outer sectors, species whose allegiance was often brittle and self-serving, shifted nervously. They had always viewed humanity as a quaint, volatile anomaly discovered during a routine resource sweep, a species that had stumbled into basic warp technology through sheer, unguided persistence. Their planet Earth was catalogued as a Tier 3 primitive world, noisy, ecologically chaotic, and politically fractured beyond measure. Yet these apes, as some lower caste administrators still privately referred to them, had just obliterated a diplomatic vessel protected by the highest level of ascendancy shielding without so much as a warning burst. "Their logic escapes us," murmured Elder Vorn, whose species, the Silvari, communicated primarily through pheromonal shifts that the ascendancy translators rendered as flat, hesitant tones. "We extended the olive branch of structure. We offered the path of regulated expansion. They chose the path of absolute negation." Kalen slammed a manipulator softly onto the table's surface, the impact producing a low, resonant thud that echoed through the vast space. "Negation is merely the precursor to the definitive statement, Elder. We dispatched the punitive measure, the rapid deployment strike group, to secure the remnants and interrogate the surviving personnel. Where is the feed from the retribution?" Lyra's projection flickered, displaying a complex, multidimensional map centered on the Sol system. "That is the second, more disturbing data point, Primarch. The retribution encountered an organized resistance pattern within the outer Uit cloud of the Sol system, precisely where the diplomatic vessel was destroyed. Their resistance was not kinetic, it was informational. The retribution's primary navigation matrix. failed simultaneously with the corruption of its command firewall. The resulting cascading shutdown lasted only 4.7 standard hours before the vessel entered a complete blackout. She paused, allowing the implications to settle like toxic fog. We have received no distress beacon. We have received no surrender. We have received only the silence that preceded the destruction of the Perseverance. The Strategos Council, usually a bastion of unflappable imperial authority, seemed to buckle under the weight of this unexpected competence. Humanity was supposed to be disorganized, prone to internal strife, easily cowed by the sheer scale of Xylan dominance. They were not supposed to possess the capacity to dismantle an advanced ascendancy cruiser through remote, elegant sabotage. "They are hiding something behind that third planet," Kalen stated, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though the acoustic dampeners ensured no sound escaped the conclave. "Their primary defense matrix, whatever form it takes, is localized. We must deploy a full, overwhelming response. We will not tolerate a breach in established galactic protocol. The precedent this sets." "The precedent," Lyra interjected, her voice rising slightly in pitch indicating stress in her species' interpretation of logical sequencing, "is that they are not primitive. They are either exceptionally lucky or exceptionally advanced in methods we have yet to categorize. Sending the punitive fleet in an overt, overwhelming assault, as you suggest, Primarch, would be the precisely logical step for a species reacting to insult. It would be the predictable step. If the Terrans have the capacity to disable the retribution remotely, what is their countermeasure against a full fleet deployment?" The debate raged for another extended period, cycles devoted to the ancient, self-reinforcing dogma of the ascendancy, that any species lacking centralized, millennia-spanning imperial unity must inherently be weaker than the collective. They analyzed the data through the lens of known galactic warfare, missiles, energy projection, subspace manipulation. They could not conceive of non-kinetic resolution, particularly not from a species that had only recently mastered stable atmospheric flight. The fear was palpable, the arrogance slowly eroding into genuine systemic dread. What if this was not a political statement, but a warning shot fired by a power they had grossly misjudged? Finally, a decision was reached through exhausted consensus. Overt military action was deferred. Instead, a small, highly specialized diplomatic vessel, the Arbiter of Law, would be dispatched. It would carry only a skeleton crew of linguists, diplomats, and a single, highly classified defensive array, mandated to open direct, high-frequency communication with the Terran world. They were to demand explanation for the loss of the Perseverance and the disabling of the Retribution, and offer the established path back into the civilized galactic structure: submission, guided incorporation, and forfeiture of independent technological development. As the Arbiter of Law initiated its jump sequence toward the Sol system, the representatives of the Ascendancy watched the projections, their vast, ancient minds filled with a singular, terrifying uncertainty. They were attempting to negotiate with an entity that treated their established rules of engagement as if they were trivial biological secretions, easily ignored or wiped clean. The terrible war they spoke of was not one of ships and lasers, but of understanding, and in that arena the Ascendancy felt profoundly, unnervingly illiterate. The journey was slow, deliberately paced to convey diplomatic gravity rather than haste. The Arbiter of Law was designed for presence, not speed. Its hull was laced with archaic ceremonial etching that symbolized the continuity of the Ascendancy across epochs. Aboard, Ambassador Thrax, a being whose entire species was dedicated to the meticulous study of emerging civilizations, felt the weight of the entire galactic order pressing upon his multifaceted senses. He was acutely aware of the undercurrent of hostility radiating from the capital worlds, the unspoken belief among the Primarchs that he was merely being sent to record the final, futile attempt before the inevitable, crushing sterilization of the Sol system. Thrax reviewed the final data burst recovered from the crippled Retribution, a single fragmented waveform that preceded the system failure. It was not a weapon signature. It was not a transmission of dominance. It was an encrypted data packet, complex in structure, layered with redundancy protocols far exceeding Xylan standards. He had run the decryption algorithms for the entire transit, and the results, when they finally resolved, were profoundly unsettling. "Navigator Zidar," Thrax projected, his voice modulated to a calm, measured frequency. "Confirm trajectory lock on the Sol beak. End designation." Zidar, a pragmatic being focused entirely on the mechanics of spacetime manipulation, responded instantly. Confirmed, Ambassador. We are exiting warp transit at the designated secure perimeter, 600 million kilometers from the third planet. No hostile signatures detected within immediate sensor range, though the volume of static debris in the outer system remains anomalous. Thrax gazed at the primary view screen, which now displayed the familiar, if somewhat crudely formed, Sol system. The gas giants were vibrant, the asteroid belts messy, and the third planet, Earth, was a swirling palette of blue, white, and terrestrial brown, almost offensively vibrant compared to the regulated, engineered environments the Ascendancy favored. Initiate passive broadcast, Thrax commanded. Transmit the universal greeting sequence, level 7, emphasizing adherence to established protocols regarding extraterrestrial interaction. Let them know we approach with the intent of structured dialogue, not immediate conflict. As the Ascendancy's complex, mathematically perfect greeting pulsed into the void, the sensor arrays registered an immediate, sharp response from the Sol system's central planetary mass. It was not a broadcast, nor a defensive posture. It was a precise, narrowband signal directed exclusively at the arbiter of law. Lyra's pre-departure analysis had been partially correct. The Terrans were highly sophisticated, but their methods were entirely alien to galactic norms. They had not responded with a fleet or a threat. They had responded with a single, direct invitation. The decrypted data packet resolved itself into a simple instruction, overlaid with the complex, archaic language matrices Thrax had spent decades preparing for: human English. Ambassador Thrax of the Ascendancy, your vessel is detected. You are violating established quarantine vector 7 beta. We recognize the loss of the diplomatic vessel, Perseverance, and the disabling of the survey cruiser, Retribution. These actions were necessary to prevent the unauthorized dissemination of specific biological agents present on the Perseverance, which would have caused systemic collapse across multiple planetary biospheres within your sector. We require your full attention. You will proceed directly to the designated docking station orbiting your target planet. Remain passive. We await your arrival for direct, unmediated dialogue. Thrax felt a sensation akin to vertigo, though his species was not physically prone to such instability. Biological agents. They had unilaterally declared the Ascendancy's diplomatic mission a vector for disease and neutralized it, not out of malice, but out of quarantine procedure. This introduced an ethical framework entirely outside the Ascendancy's pragmatic, power-based calculus. Zidar analyzed the claim, cross-referenced the residual spectral analysis from the Perseverance wreckage against known Xylan and allied bioweapons registries. The navigator's response was delayed, marked by a slight tremor in his synthesized voice. Ambassador, the spectral signature is not a weapon. It is a highly complex synthesized protein structure, a prion perhaps designed to interface with carbon-based nervous systems. If deployed on a mass scale, the effect would be immediate neurological dissolution across multiple sentient species types. It is highly specific, Ambassador. It is a targeted biological purge. The arrogance of the Primarchs, the certainty that humans were merely clumsy adolescents playing with fire, collapsed in that instant. Humanity had not been responding to a diplomatic slight. They had been acting as interstellar custodians, ruthlessly and efficiently eliminating a perceived contagion, even if that contagion was wrapped in the diplomatic banner of the Ascendancy. The terrible war they feared was not beginning. It had already occurred, fought, and concluded in the silence between sensor pings. We proceed, Thrax decided, the weight of the moment settling heavily upon him. Alter course. Set landing sequence for the specified orbital dock. Maintain maximum defensive posture, but do not initiate weapon charging unless directed by me. We will meet them on their terms. Their logic, whatever its foundation, appears absolute. The journey to the orbital dock was unnerving in its simplicity. There were no escort vessels, no visible defense grid, only a single, precise guidance beam projected from the station itself, locking onto the arbiter of law. The station was a marvel of functionalist design, a vast, skeletal torus of matte black material that absorbed ambient light, rendering it almost invisible against the backdrop of deep space. It was massive, far larger than any Xylan orbital station dedicated solely to diplomatic reception. It was engineered not for ceremony, but for absolute security and functionality. As the arbiter docked, the magnetic clamps engaging with a soft clunk that ray. Reverberated through Thrax's structure, the internal atmospheric processors began to cycle rapidly, purging the Xylan-neutral atmosphere and replacing it with the Terran standard. Thrax observed the process with detached fascination. The efficiency was staggering. The entire environmental shift took less than a standard cycle, a feat requiring energy management protocols that surpassed even the latest Xylan warp core derivations. The airlock hissed open, revealing not the expected armored security detail or the grim-faced military officers preparing for a hostile interrogation, but two figures clad in simple, utilitarian environmental suits, gray, unadorned, bearing no insignia of rank or affiliation. They wore full-face visors that rendered their expressions opaque. One of the figures raised a hand, a gesture Thrax's database tentatively categorized as halt or pause. A clear, synthesized voice, perfectly translated, emotionless, and resonant, spoke directly into Thrax's internal comms matrix. Ambassador Thrax, we welcome you to the Sol Orbital Interface Station. We appreciate your compliance with the instructions transmitted earlier. We understand your apprehension regarding the necessary neutralization of the Perseverance and the temporary incapacitation of the Retribution. Please follow us. Direct discourse will commence in the secure mediation chamber. Thrax looked at his own escort detail, 3 armored Xylan security officers whose primary weapon systems were currently deactivated under his orders. He gave a curt mental signal, and they reluctantly followed the human figures into the sterile corridor. The interior architecture was another study in contrast. Where Xylan structures were flowing, organic, and built to convey the endless scope of the Empire, the human station was angular, ruthlessly practical, and designed for immediate utility. There were no decorative flourishes, no status markers, only functional conduits, clear signage, and pervasive, low-level illumination. They reached the mediation chamber. It was circular, sparsely furnished with 2 simple raised platforms facing each other across a low, polished surface. On the opposing platform, 2 more humans waited. These were clearly the principal representatives. One, taller, held a bearing that suggested authority without overt display, his posture relaxed but utterly composed. The other was seated, seemingly engaged in the silent manipulation of a small, smooth slab of material, which glowed faintly under his touch. The 2 welcoming figures gestured them to the platforms. Thrax and his security detail took their positions, the Xylan officers instinctively forming a defensive semicircle behind their ambassador, weapons still powered down, but hands resting near activation studs. The taller human stepped forward slightly. His visor remained opaque, but the synthesized voice carried an authority that transcended rank. Ambassador Thrax, I am designated as Delegate Prime Jian Li. This is Specialist Anya Sharma. We represent the collective sovereignty of the Terran system. Thrax initiated the formal Xylan greeting sequence, a complex series of modulated vocalizations detailing lineage and adherence to cosmic harmony. It concluded with a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head structure. Delegate Prime Jian Li waited for the translation sequence to complete, showing no sign of impatience. When he spoke again, his tone was even almost academic. Ambassador Thrax, your diplomatic address is noted. We must dispense with established interstellar niceties. Time is a finite resource, and we require resolution on several critical vectors immediately. We appreciate that you arrived here under duress, believing a war was commencing. We assure you, the war you perceive is not between the Ascendancy and ourselves, but between order and catastrophic instability. Thrax felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature regulation. This was not the confused, defensive posturing of a frightened novice species. This was the pronouncement of an established, confident authority. Delegate Prime, Thrax responded, ensuring his own tone projected the required gravity, though his internal processes were reeling. The termination of the Perseverance was an act of aggression against the sovereign diplomatic core of the Ascendancy. Your claim regarding unknown biological agents is entirely unsubstantiated by our records. We demand a full accounting and the immediate release of any surviving personnel. Specialist Sharma finally looked up from the glowing slab, her visor catching the ambient light. Her voice, slightly higher in pitch than Jian Li's, was incredibly precise. Ambassador, the accounting is forthcoming, but the personnel are non-recoverable. They were either compromised by the pathogen they carried, or they self-terminated to prevent containment breach upon our interception. The Perseverance was not a diplomatic vessel. It was a D. Each spectrum contamination scout, masquerading under the guise of diplomatic immunity, dispatched to test the efficacy of the Gamma-7 quarantine against known xenophobic pathogens native to your domain. Thrax's security detail shifted, their heavy manipulator limbs twitching. Masquerading, contamination scout. Jian Li nodded slowly. The Ascendancy Ambassador exists within a highly specific, isolated biosphere defined by your historical trajectory. Your genetic drift, while robust within your own species cluster, has produced numerous symbiotic and parasitic structures, including specific prion strains, that are uniquely toxic to carbon-silicon hybrid biologies prevalent in several of our younger allied territories. The Perseverance was not carrying a weapon against us. It was carrying a silent, slow-acting contaminant from your established domain, intended to destabilize those systems that have recently aligned with the Ascendancy, thereby expanding your sphere of influence through engineered dependency. This was an accusation of unimaginable magnitude, delivered with the casual certainty of stating atmospheric pressure. Thrax felt his structured worldview begin to crack. The Ascendancy prided itself on its meticulous, gradual expansion, leveraging technological superiority and political integration. Biological warfare, particularly subtle, cross-species targeting, was considered barbaric and inefficient, a tactic of primitive species. Your accusation is inflammatory, Thrax managed, struggling to keep his voice even. The Ascendancy maintains the highest ethical code regarding biological interaction. We share technology, we do not poison. Anya Sharma activated a function on her slab. A complex 3D projection materialized between the two platforms. It was a highly detailed molecular schematic, rotating slowly, annotated with symbols that even Thrax, fluent in dozens of galactic language bases, could only partially translate. This, Sharma stated, pointing a slender finger toward a specific looping structure within the projection, is the primary agent recovered from the Perseverance's medical bay, analyzed remotely before structural collapse. It integrates with specific ion channels present in the neural architecture of the Cathar species, a relatively recent Ascendancy addition. The resulting neurological cascade mimics severe atmospheric deprivation, leading to systemic shutdown within 48 cycles. The Perseverance was not scouting the quarantine line. It was preparing a deployment vector. Thrax stared at the schematic, recognizing the underlying principles of the molecular bonding, complex, elegant, and unmistakably predatory. He remembered the political maneuvering on the fringes of the Cathar integration debates. The Ascendancy had been desperate to secure their heavy metal processing capabilities, and their integration had been surprisingly swift. If this is true, Thrax said slowly, the implications cascading through his mind, why would the Ascendancy engage in such clandestine, destabilizing behavior? It contradicts the very foundation of our political philosophy. Jian Li stepped forward, his presence imposing despite his simple clothing. Ambassador, your philosophy is based on centralized, visible control. Our observation indicates that the Ascendancy structure is far less unified than your broadcasts suggest. We monitor your internal chatter, your substrata reports. There are significant, powerful factions within your own hierarchy that see the slower path of integration as weakness. They view newly integrated species not as assets, but as controllable reservoirs of resources and genetic stock to be manipulated. This was the core revelation. Humanity was not reacting to a threat from the Ascendancy as a monolithic entity, but to a rogue, powerful faction within it, a faction that had used the diplomatic envoy as a biological Trojan horse. And humanity, recognizing this, had executed a surgical strike against the threat, inadvertently incinerating the Ascendancy's legitimate diplomatic outreach in the process. The disabling of the retribution, Thrax inquired, his voice now laced with professional fascination rather than fear, was that also related to this perceived internal faction? Anya Sharma offered the second revelation, one that dwarfed the biological accusation. The retribution was not merely disabled by informational warfare, Ambassador. When our counter-intrusion systems engaged, they did not just disrupt the firewall. They accessed the vessel's primary operational logs. The retribution was not en route to investigate. It was en route to deploy a localized kinetic strike against the Terran manufacturing complexes we detected beneath the Antarctic ice sheets, authorized by a Class 4 covert directive issued from the Xylos Military Advisory Board. bypassing the Primarch Council entirely. The silence that followed was profound. Thrax felt the cold logic of the Who. Man action settling over him. They had detected an impending unauthorized military strike, a clear precursor to full invasion, while simultaneously neutralizing a biological attack. Their response was not chaotic. It was a meticulously layered defense executed simultaneously across multiple domains: biological threat neutralization, kinetic defense through remote incapacitation, and finally, the immediate, direct demand for dialogue with the actual governing body. "We require immediate confirmation," Thrax stated, leaning forward, his multifaceted eyes locking onto Jian Li. "If your assessment of our internal politics is accurate and a rogue military element initiated actions against us, then we share a common enemy, the architects of this deception within the Xylo's command structure." Jian Li returned the gaze, unwavering. "That is precisely why we permitted your arrival, Ambassador. We did not destroy your vessel to initiate war. We destroyed it to prevent the war the rogue elements of your structure intended to start. We need to collaborate to expose and neutralize this clandestine operation before it escalates beyond retrieval." The ensuing hours were dedicated to an intense, high-stakes exchange of data that bypassed standard diplomatic filters entirely. Thrax, recognizing the chilling competence displayed by Sharma and Jian Li, bypassed his own ship's generalist translators and linked his primary analytical cortex directly to the data stream provided by the humans. He needed raw information, not filtered consensus. The human data package was overwhelming in its detail. It contained encrypted communications fragments, financial transaction traces across dozens of independent galactic credit networks, and most damningly, sensor logs detailing clandestine shuttle movements between a remote Xylan military outpost in the Cygnus Arm and specific, high-ranking members of the Xylo's military advisory cabinet. "The faction responsible," Jian Li explained, projecting the data streams onto the mediation table with practiced ease, "is led by the remnants of the old guard hegemony, those who believe the ascendancy should rule through absolute technological monopoly, not negotiated integration. They saw your expansion into the Cathar systems as necessary, but deemed the subsequent peace too vulnerable. They required a catalyst to justify an aggressive, sweeping reconsolidation of power across the periphery, beginning with the swift subjugation of any volatile, emerging power like Terrans." Thrax analyzed the data relating to the biological agent. The molecular signatures matched complex retroviral vectors developed centuries ago by a disgraced Xylan biological research consortium, long believed purged. The fact that this technology had been resurrected and utilized by a modern military element indicated a deep, systemic rot within the command structure. "The level of operational security displayed by this faction is unprecedented for internal corruption," Thrax admitted, a profound sense of weariness in his tone. "To circumvent the Council, to generate the necessary cover signals for the Perseverance's mission, and to authorize the Retribution's kinetic deployment, the depth of infiltration required is staggering." Anya Sharma leaned forward. "Ambassador, you are underestimating the resourcefulness of a species that has faced extinction multiple times on a single planet. We have spent millennia honing the ability to operate in the shadows, to analyze complex adversarial systems under extreme pressure. Our military doctrine is predicated on deception, misdirection, and achieving technological parity through focused, desperate innovation. When we detected the energy spike consistent with a covert, high-yield weapon test originating from the Retribution, a signature we cataloged years ago when analyzing fringe military doctrine, we had to assume immediate annihilation was imminent. This explanation resonated deeply with Xylan's strategic thinkers, even if Thrax was shocked by the Terrans' interpretation of their own history. They were seeing humanity not as a single, unified galactic power, but as a distillation of perpetual, localized struggle, resulting in unparalleled tactical flexibility. "Your response to the Retribution was equally complex," Thrax noted, focusing on the technical data. "The informational cascade that disabled the cruiser, it wasn't merely a brute force attack. It introduced a recursive logic loop that forced the core processing units to attempt to resolve an unsolvable paradox based on the vessel's own maintenance protocols." Jian Li nodded, a trace of professional pride entering his synthesized voice. "We call it the Socratic virus. It forces the target system to question its own foundational integrity until it collapses under the weight of self-doubt. It is efficient, non-destructive to the physical structure, and remarkably difficult to trace back to the origin vector, wick. H was masked through multiple planetary relay points. We needed the retribution intact enough to analyze its command structure for further rogue elements. The philosophical chasm between the two species narrowed significantly here. The ascendancy operated on established, verifiable laws of physics and codified political structures. Humanity seemed to operate on the mastery of systemic uncertainty, turning the opponent's rigid logic against itself. "We are in agreement," Thrax stated firmly. "The priority shifts from punitive action against the Terrans to immediate, coordinated action against the rogue military elements within the ascendancy hierarchy. Their actions jeopardize not only the stability of the sector, but the core ethical integrity of the ascendancy itself. If this is allowed to stand, the entire structure collapses into open, chaotic warfare." "Agreed," Jian Li confirmed. "We must present irrefutable evidence to the Grand Conclave, evidence that transcends the political biases of the Primarchs. We require full data integration. Your access to the Ascendancy's deep archival records, combined with our recent real-time monitoring of their sub-level communications, should provide the necessary undeniable proof." For the next half-cycle, the mediation chamber became a nexus of interspecies collaboration. Xylan analytical frameworks, capable of processing multi-dimensional historical datasets spanning millennia, were merged with the Terran capacity for immediate, complex pattern recognition in real-time communications traffic. The sheer volume of data being correlated was staggering, creating a unified tapestry of conspiracy, betrayal, and hidden deployment orders originating from the heart of Xylos. When the analysis stabilized, Thrax initiated the secure subspace channel back to the Conclave. He bypassed the standard diplomatic frequency and used the emergency channel reserved only for existential threat notification, a channel rarely activated in the last 5,000 years. The Grand Conclave reconvened under an atmosphere far colder than before. The initial arrogance had been replaced by a brittle, defensive silence. Kalen of the Fourth Stratum, presiding in Thrax's absence, glared at the communication node as Thrax's avatar appeared, a shimmering, slightly distorted representation of his true form, accompanied by the calm, unmoving presence of Jian Li. "Ambassador Thrax," Kalen's voice cracked with barely suppressed fury. "You have chosen the path of treason. You have aligned with the aggressor species, shared our secure channels with them, and now you present their lies as truth before the Conclave. Where is the accounting for the destroyed envoys?" Thrax stood his ground, the holographic projection utterly steady. Behind him, Jian Li remained silent, a monumental figure of quiet certainty. "Primarch Kalen," Thrax began, his voice resonating with absolute authority, a tone he had not utilized since achieving his ambassadorship. "I have not chosen treason. I have chosen stability. I have engaged with the Terran representatives, and in doing so I have uncovered the true perpetrators of the aggression that struck the Perseverance and the Retribution. They were not Terran actions. They were covert operations sanctioned by a rogue military faction within the Ascendancy structure." Kalen scoffed, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. "Lies, fabrication to cover your failure to maintain diplomatic rigidity. We will not tolerate this weakness. Security detail, prepare the retrieval sequence for Thrax and the immediate termination of the Terran delegation." Before the command could be fully processed by the station masters, Jian Li moved. He did not shout. He did not raise a weapon. He merely activated the data presentation protocols. The vast holographic display of the Conclave was instantly flooded, not with Xylan scripts, but with the raw, unfiltered Terran analysis. Millions of lines of encrypted data flashed across the air, resolving into undeniable evidence. Communications between specific, high-ranking military advisors and the shadowy consortium responsible for reviving the ancient biological vectors. There were telemetry readings showing the Retribution receiving false launch authorization codes, codes that originated from within the Ascendancy's own secure servers, bypassing standard firewalls through layered administrative access unique to the old guard. "Observe, Primarchs," Jian Li's synthesized voice boomed across the Conclave, perfectly synchronized with the visual data. The command structure that authorized the kinetic strike against the Terran manufacturing centers was signed under the administrative seal of Fleet Commander Vorlag. operating under Emergency Mandate 9 Theta, a mandate only authorized for Xylo's system-wide defense against external collapse. Vorlag, a known loyalist to the hegemonic ideal, used this loophole to initiate the war you now claim Thrax has instigated. The assembled Primarchs stared at the evidence. It was too detailed, too meticulous, too interwoven with the Ascendancy's own deepest security protocols to be fabrication. The signature of betrayal was written in their own complex, millennia-old digital language. Kalen's composure finally shattered. His primary ocular cluster flickered erratically. It is a sophisticated forgery, a Terran trick. A trick requires misdirection, Primarch, Anya Sharma interjected coolly from the secondary projection node. We prefer demonstrable proof. Observe the temporal sequence. She highlighted a series of time-stamped data points. The first showed the authorization for the biological payload delivery on the Perseverance being transferred from a secure Xylan node to the vessel's command structure 2 cycles before the Perseverance even left the primary Xylan staging area. The second showed the kinetic launch authorization for the Retribution being issued by Vorlag's terminal 3 hours before the Retribution made its scheduled warp transition. The hegemonic faction did not wait for the Terrans to violate the quarantine, Thrax stated, his voice ringing with righteous fury. They manufactured the violation. They deployed the contamination scout under the guise of diplomacy, knowing the Terrans would react. When the Terrans neutralized the contamination vector, the hegemony then deployed the Retribution to eliminate the Terran manufacturing base, using the resulting chaos as justification to seize centralized power across the Allied sectors. The sheer, terrifying elegance of the human counter-strategy became evident. They had played the hegemony's game better than the hegemony itself. They allowed the controlled destruction of their own diplomatic assets to occur because they recognized the underlying pattern of deception, and instead of reacting with raw force, they engineered a situation where the true enemy, the rogue faction, was exposed by their own aggression. A tremor ran through the conclave. Elder Vorn, his pheromones signaling utter systemic shock, signaled agreement. The delegates from the peripheral worlds, terrified of being caught between a rogue military strike and a full-scale, unauthorized war, rapidly aligned with Thrax's findings. Kalen was isolated. His political maneuvering, based on inherited status and assumed superiority, had been dismantled by cold, ethical logic and superior systemic analysis. Thrax, Kalen whispered, defeated, "What is your proposed resolution?" "The resolution is transparency and unification," Thrax announced. "Ambassador Thrax will remain here under direct coordination with the Terran leadership to fully excise the hegemonic influence from the Council structure. We will present the totality of this evidence to the entire Ascendancy Assembly within 1 rotation. In the interim, the hegemony's kinetic and biological programs must be neutralized. Delegate Prime Jian Li and Specialist Sharma will provide the necessary technical expertise to secure those assets, in conjunction with Ascendancy internal security forces loyal to the Council." Jian Li stepped forward once more. "We accept this temporary mandate. However, Ambassador, understand this. Our participation is not an offer of alliance under your structure. It is a necessary temporary convergence of interests against a shared internal threat. We remain sovereign. We remain separate. We will assist you in restoring the integrity of the Ascendancy, not in joining it." This was the ultimate statement of human policy. Not conquest, not assimilation, but surgical assistance predicated on shared threat elimination, maintaining absolute autonomy. It was the most profoundly unsettling, yet ethically sound, proposition the Ascendancy had encountered in millennia. They had sought to crush a juvenile power. Instead, they had found a cold, capable entity that had saved them from their own internal decay. The terrible war had been averted, replaced by a necessary, uneasy collaboration. The following cycles were a blur of intense, highly classified operations. Xylan internal security forces, working under the direct, logistical oversight of Anya Sharma, moved swiftly through key military installations previously controlled by the hegemony loyalists. The Terran technical mastery of recursive logic and deep system intrusion proved invaluable. They located and purged the residual biological manufacturing capacity, often disabling entire automated facilities with a single, targeted command sequence that overloaded their operational parameters. The political fallout was immediate and absolute. Fleet Commander Vorlag and his senior military backers were apprehended by loyalist elements. Stunned and betrayed, their carefully constructed narrative of necessary preemptive war evaporated under the glare of irrefutable data correlation. Kalen, humbled and chastened, led the conclave in a series of public ensures, dismantling the remnants of the hegemony's influence with surprising ferocity, driven by the primal fear of what the Terrans, and their own rogue elements, were capable of. Thrax remained in orbit, his discussions with Jayan Lee and Sharma deepening from tactical necessity to philosophical exchange. He found that the humans possessed a deep, almost spiritual reverence for systemic integrity and ethical clarity, even when their methods appeared ruthlessly pragmatic to the Xylan eye. They did not seek dominion. They sought stability and predictability in the galactic environment, viewing chaotic actors, whether internal military hardliners or external contaminants, as unacceptable sources of entropy. One rotation after the initial crisis, Thrax met Jayan Lee in a newly secured observation deck on the orbital station, now jointly managed by Xylan engineers and Terran technicians. Below them, the Earth spun silently, its vibrant biosphere a testament to the resilience that fueled the Terrans' unique capability. "The hegemony is neutralized, Ambassador," Jayan Lee reported, his voice calm. "Vorlag and his immediate circle are in stasis pending full exposure to the Galactic Tribunal. The immediate threat of systemic collapse within the Ascendancy has been averted, for which we owe you a debt that cannot be quantified in standard currency or political favor," Thrax replied, the admission heavy with meaning. "Your species possesses a quality we have long dismissed as mere biological agitation, the capacity for profound, sustained ethical commitment, even when it demands the expenditure of self-preservation." Jayan Lee paused, gazing out at the distant stars, a gesture Thrax was beginning to associate with deep contemplation. "Ambassador, our history is a continuous series of near extinctions. We have learned that complexity breeds vulnerability. To survive, one must be prepared to excise the threat, no matter how close to the core it resides. We prioritize the integrity of the system over the comfort of the hierarchy. And now that the immediate threat is managed," Thrax continued, "where do we proceed? We cannot simply return to the previous state of ignorance. The Ascendancy now understands that we house elements capable of such deception, and you understand that we are organized enough to counter it. A formal, open alliance seems the only logical next step." Jayan Lee turned, and for the first time, Thrax felt a sense of personal connection through the opaque visor. "Alliance is premature, Ambassador. We respect your process of internal purification. We do not seek to integrate, nor do we wish to become the external enforcers of your governance." He signaled Sharma, who moved to a console adjacent to the viewport. She did not bring up military schematics or political maps. Instead, she projected a single, complex signal analysis. It was the source of the initial, fragmented waveform that had been recovered from the Retribution, the data packet the humans had used to issue their first communication. "Ambassador Thrax," Sharma began, her voice imbued with a new seriousness, "we held back the complete analysis of that initial transmission. We prioritized the immediate defense against the hegemony faction. Now that stability is achieved, we must address the true context of our initial contact." The projected signal was breathtakingly vast, a complex mathematical construction layered upon itself perhaps 100 times, woven through with variables that implied dimensions beyond the conventional 3 spatial and 1 temporal. "This signal," Sharma continued, tracing a pathway through the abstract geometry, "was not generated by Terran technology. It was a passive receiver ping, utilizing a very specific antiquated modulation pattern we have been tracking for decades on deep space probes that left our system during the chaotic pre-warp era, sent out purely as philosophical gestures. This ping arrived at our primary deep space array approximately 1 standard Terran year ago." Thrax examined the analysis, his mind straining to keep pace with the cascading layers of information. "It is not recognizable within any known galactic standard. What is its origin?" "Its origin is not important yet," Jayan Lee interjected, stepping close to the projection. "What is important is the content. The signal is a beacon, Ambassador. It is a directed, complex message broadcast across vast cosmological distances, originating far beyond the established boundaries of both the Ascendancy and the known galactic core territories." He paused, letting the scale of the revelation sink in. The Terran technological leaps you witnessed, the Socratic virus, the deep system infiltration, the rapid deployment of countermeasures, were not developed for us, Ambassador. They were developed in response to the anticipation of this signal. Thrax felt a profound existential vertigo. Anticipation? You mean to tell me your entire species structure, your history of localized conflict and desperate innovation, has been dedicated to preparing for a signal that we, in our millennia of observation, have never detected? Anya Sharma nodded, a slow, deliberate confirmation. We knew the signal was coming, not conceptually but mathematically. Our finest theoretical minds, working on the edge of fundamental physics, predicted the existence of a universal information saturation point, a threshold of civilization advancement where the inherent chaos of the galaxy precipitates a response from something older. Jian Li pointed to the complex, elegant mathematical structure of the beacon. This is not a declaration of war, nor a message of peace. It is a diagnostic query. It is a probe sent by a consciousness, or a network of consciousnesses, existing on a scale we cannot fully comprehend, designed to assess the viability and ethical structure of developing civilizations before they reach a critical mass of influence. And the perseverance? Thrax demanded, suddenly grasping the horrifying implication. Why did the hegemony faction attempt to use biological agents just as this signal arrived? Because, Sharma explained, her voice hushed, the hegemony knew about the beacon, too. They were tracking the same mathematical signatures derived from fringe research centuries ago. They believed that their form of galactic order, rigid, uncompromising, centrally controlled, was the one that would pass the diagnostic. They intended to use the biological contamination to ensure the Cathar systems were pacified under ascendancy control before the diagnostic arrived, thereby presenting a unified, powerful, and ideologically pure front to this older intelligence. They were trying to pass the test, Ambassador, but they were preparing to cheat by eliminating inconveniently diverse variables, like the Terrans. Jian Li straightened, his posture communicating the finality of the situation. We neutralized the biological threat and exposed the hegemony's plot not just to save your political structure, Ambassador, but because we understood that an ascendancy compromised by internal corruption and attempting to cheat the diagnostic query would result in the total erasure of both our species when the true assessment was made. The concept was paralyzing. The war they thought they were fighting, the political maneuvering, the territorial disputes, the rise and fall of factions, was mere background noise compared to the cosmic audit they were currently undergoing. Humanity had not merely averted an internal conflict. They had forced the ascendancy into an ethical posture capable of facing a test far greater than any localized empire. So, Thrax said, his voice barely a whisper against the vastness of space outside the viewport, we are not at war with each other. We are merely two young civilizations stumbling toward an appointment with a cosmic arbiter. Precisely, Jian Li confirmed. And we have just secured the first critical victory, convincing the ascendancy that true strength lies not in the application of brute force or political dominance, but in the clear, ethical defense of systemic integrity, even at great personal cost. That is the only metric that will survive this diagnostic query. Thrax looked from Jian Li to Sharma, then back to the distant, fragile blue marble of Earth, the world that birthed this unexpected savior species. They were not conquerors or rebels. They were guardians, shaped by existential threat into the only entities capable of ensuring the continuation of their entire galactic neighborhood. What is the next step in preparation for this audit? Thrax asked, no longer as an ambassador seeking political advantage, but as a student seeking wisdom from a terrifyingly insightful master. Anya Sharma adjusted the projection, the vast, complex mathematics of the alien beacon now overlaid with the simple, elegant coding structure of Terran communication protocols. The diagnostic query is active, Ambassador. It is listening to every communication, monitoring every action. The next step is transparency. We must demonstrate, clearly and without equivocation, that the ascendancy and the Terran system are capable of true, selfless, collaborative ethical action. The terrible war is over. The true trial has just begun. The lights of the observation deck seemed to dim, focusing all attention onto the projected signal. The silent, ancient eye watching from the deep dark, waiting to see if two disparate species, driven by fear and necessity, could forge a unified, honest front against the universe's ultimate judgment. The fusion of ascendancy philosophy and Terran pragmatic resilience was the only shield they possessed against oblivion.